I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
You know, I've been doing this show for a long time now, and every show is just its own remarkable feat of execution and showcasing of humanity. But every now and then, I'm greeted with an opportunity to meet somebody truly unique. So we're going to rural Alabama to talk about a gentleman named Kermit Farmer, whose wife, a Korean immigrant, Dr. Linda Farmer, an oncologist, was diagnosed with cancer and passed away, leaving behind her husband Kermit and their son. They were married for 19 years. And this man is doing extraordinary work in her name, in her honor, in her spirit, to give back to that local community and more. The word genuine doesn't do it justice to his absolute unbridled innocence and authenticity and passion. And before we get started, I'll leave you with a quote you're going to hear in our conversation. There is no elevator to healing. We all have to take the stairs. My friends, I give you Kermit Farmer. Enjoy the show. Kermit, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you much for having me on. This will be a first experience for me, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's all downhill, trust me.
Thank you for saying it's all downhill. Yes.
You're welcome for that. No, look, I've done my reconnaissance, and you're hard to find on the internet, but the parts that are there are really strong and very impressive. And you're a real man of the people. I've read a bunch of stuff about you. I've watched your videos, the way people describe you. Like, I feel like you're the embodiment of grassroots. This is all about the people on the ground just trying to live their lives, and all this noise is a bunch of shit.
I will try to live up to those high thoughts and remarks, Matthew.
Now, I looked at your history. You've been a man of the community for a very long time now. Is this like born of your condition?
I would say that a lot of times the boots on the ground don't get the needed support to do the things that they need to do. And I think we need to arm the people of any organization need to be armed with all the resources available to accomplish the mission that needs to be done. I'm not that familiar with the healthcare space from me personally, but I was married to it for 19 3/4 years, and that's my entryway into the healthcare community.
Yeah, we refer to that as when healthcare lands on you.
Okay, I like that.
Because no one asks for this to happen. It's not like retail where you want to buy a pair of sneakers, whatnot, and then you're in a caregiver role. And that's also a completely under-recognized opportunity to support people in the world, in the country, especially through cancer, which your wife had. And you're caregivers for each other just being a married couple. That's hard enough when you're well.
Mm-hmm. In our situation, what we had was just a really beautiful relationship in so many different ways. I was the antagonist of our relationship. I was the one that flew closest to the sun, and my wife was the one that grinded through the day and grinded through all that she did. And the dynamics of two very different personalities, it just worked. And we didn't, lucky to say we didn't have the fights or the stresses or the angst that we've seen, some of our friends have through the years, through the decades. And, then we're struck with this bad news of my wife getting cancer and how she's given that talk to so many people. And I've never watched her give the talk. And for the first time, I watched her give the talk. And she gave it to my son of, hey, your mom has cancer. And the grace and the beauty that she did that with, and it happened to be her last, time she ever gave the talk. It was just a beautiful thing. It really was. So we were so strong beforehand, but we grew even closer through the process.
Yeah, I've done a lot of shows. I've met a lot of doctors who worked in oncology and then happened to become patients of their own universe. And it's an odd other side of the fence to experience. And of course, when you are married to one, by the way, opposites attract and every kite needs an anchor. How's that? I think that sums up good marriages right there.
That's great.
How long was she in practice and what was her oncology practice?
She was in practice for about 17 years and in general oncology in Auburn, Alabama. And when we first came to Auburn, she was working for a small practice, and then the hospital invited her to come over to, in essence, build a oncology organization, a cancer center. So, and there's nothing entrepreneurial about my wife. She wants to see patients and she wants to be the very best doctor that she can, and just a prolific educator. But they had the resources around her to kind of get the practice up and running. She just had to work harder than what traditional oncologists would have to. But that was just who my wife was. She just answered the bell whenever she had to answer the bell.
I mean, it just sounds like it would have been or was incredibly rewarding to be able to build infrastructure where there was none than stepping into something where there may already be, I don't know, bureaucracy and cholesterol.
My wife would disagree there. The reason why she was on this earth was to see patients. I mean, she just wanted to help them through their journey. And she's just a unique bird. She doesn't get into the numbers as far as what her commission rate is and how she makes money and all of these other things. She would always ask for somebody else to figure it out. She looked at of every x-ray, for instance, through radiology as a part of what she did on a morning basis. So she would always get the report from radiology of that last patient, but she's going to go down and put her own eyes on it and talk to them about every single one. And she did the same with her own medicine, when it came her time. Because of the energy and effort that she put into her patients, she made no room for anything else in the business space. And I really think that's why her patients loved her, obviously, as much as they did, but her staff loved her equally as much.
It sounds like an incredible purity to her belief in Hippocrates and helping give back.
Real salt of the earth, and there's no other way to describe her. As I said that, we talked about that, during her funeral. She, there's just nobody like her. I'll be lucky enough to live in her basement in heaven. When she was on hospice for the last 17 days, we just had a lot of candid conversations, and most of it was quite warm. But she's a true one of a kind.
I read something you wrote about there's so much information today that how can patients know everything that they need to know, and that the deliverer of those messages is always the doctor, and the doctors don't always have, maybe I'll call it congenital empathy based inside them, or even the time to spend. I was fortunate that my oncologist was a human being who saw me as who I was, spent the time. In fact, he was Orthodox Jewish and met me on Shabbos to talk to me about my care in the 1990s. We called that person a mensch. Your wife was a mensch. And I can only imagine the stressors on someone who actually does want to spend that time and be a human being to these patients against the potential backdrop of having to see more people than they'd like to have to see.
Mm-hmm. The way you said that, I even got literal goosebumps, and I'm smiling from ear to ear because that's what she lived for. That's what she wanted in many ways, I'd say, on her tombstone. My wife spelled love, Time. And what she did for her patients is what created her very ethos to do what she did. She set her alarm every morning for 3:45 in the morning. She got up at 3:45 every morning, and she, in many cases, would not get home until 7 or 8 o'clock. She had a zero box entry, a zero box email thing going on, and every patient had her email, for instance. So she's not going home until her patient's questions were answered.
Yeah, that's I mean, again, like that's what everyone hopes is on the receiving end of "Please help me" when you enter the the cancer store, so to speak,
Right.
that no one wants to enter. You mentioned, obviously, as an oncologist, she was probably inherently familiar with every single aspect of what she was dealing with. Did she herself have her own oncologist?
She did. She sure did, and he helped in a very beautiful way. We looked at going elsewhere. She wanted to be treated local because she always wanted what was best for her patients. And if she's going to recommend to her patients to stay local, she was staying local. And we had one complication after another due to the nature of stomach cancer. She had 3/4 of her stomach removed, and the complications led from kidney failure, liver failure, and some other things. And trying to stay ahead of the complications for us was the hardest thing. We had 11 admissions into the hospital over the 10-month period from diagnosis to hospice.
Was she able to self-diagnose? Or, I mean, I have many friends that are doctors that desperately try not to self-diagnose. They want to go see other people because there's probably inherent bias in that. How did this manifest?
She did self-diagnosis, and she just knew early on, and she had some pain in her stomach that she couldn't get rid of. And being Korean, stomach cancer is kind of prominent, not in her family history, but in Koreans in general. And she started ruling out different things with different tests, and I really was never concerned. There's always been something in me where I knew I was going to die early, and my wife and I had always talked about that. And I knew that I was dying early. I'm quite familiar with the stats with stomach cancer, and that's not the cancer you want. And even when it got down to it was either stomach cancer or one other thing, I really thought it was that one other thing, and it wasn't. She got a phone call from the doctor and said, "Hey, it's what you thought it was." And on top of that, we found out she had retroperitoneal fibrosis, which we did not know about. They opened her up on the operating table to remove her stomach, and all of her organs were stuck together. And the surgeon at the time, amazing guy, he thought it was all cancer that had everything matted inside of her cavity. And he pulled me in the side room and asked me, "Which organs do you want me to take out?"
He asked you that question?
He sure did. Yeah. He goes, he was talking to me he was talking in more general terms, like, "Hey, what do you want me to do?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" It's like, "Well, everything's stuck together due to cancer, and it affects this liver, this part of the kidney, this whole kidney, this part of the liver." And I had to stop him and go, "Wait a minute. Are you saying that my wife is on the surgery table right now and you stepped out of surgery to come have a conversation with me? And you want me to make a decision on her behalf?" He goes, "Yeah." So I had to piece that conversation back together. And I called my wife's godparents, who happened to be in medicine, and thank goodness I did, because I wasn't looking to make that decision on my own. It turns out that it was not cancer that had everything matted together inside of her organ system and inside of her stomach cavity. It was that retroperitoneal fibrosis.
I mean, those are not dice you want to roll on your own. That's I've never heard that before. That's an incredible story.
Unfortunate story. Yeah, incredible is probably the right word. I've only actually talked about this 2 other times, so it's still quite raw, and the feeling of helplessness, which is what every patient feels, and I would say especially the caregivers have to go through, because there's folks out there that just don't give up, and that's how I've always been. And when you fight tooth and nail and you don't get the outcome that you're going to get through grit and tenacity, there's a lot of wrangling with all of that.
Yeah, the language of medicine adjectives can also be an interesting interpretation of the scenario. I say incredible because I've just been listening to these stories and doing this for 25 years, and everything is extraordinary in its own unique way. And we look at the language of medicine too. I mean, your wife would know this. I had brain cancer, and the doctor was like, "It's a very elegant tumor." I was like, "What? Are you an elegant tumor?"
Elegant tumor, yeah.
Seriously, what's wrong with you?
Exactly, yeah. I had stepped out of that room and to call the godparents, and so I was in like the patient waiting area, where just where everybody stands around, and I didn't realize that a lot of people were a part of that conversation, and they wanted to come over and console me afterwards. After hearing, I just didn't. That part of it, I still haven't even pieced together, but running through that, and time is not on your side in a whole new way now. It's quite the experience.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Kermit Farmer. All right, we're back with Kermit. Do you feel that bereavement, widows and widowers, don't get enough recognition or support? Is it an island that needs more people on it to hold hands with?
I think it's an island that only those that have been through it have that perspective. And the adversity that each one of us go through is so unique to us. And like I have valued feedback from those that have lost someone, for instance, but those that have not been on the same journey, offering a feedback or offering guidance or solutions, the feedback hasn't really connected with me. If I were to write a book, and I've thought about writing a children's book, for instance, I would say that there is no elevator to healing, and you have to take the stairs, and individuals have to go through the journey, and it's work and it's time, and how to do that without getting mad or jaded, or how you're going to take something so horrible and turn it into something beautiful is where I've been. And I've wondered if others have been there, but
I just want to repeat that. That was absolutely poetic. There's no elevator to healing. We all have to take the stairs.
And mentioning that there's no elevator and you have to take the stairs. And what I see in that children's book is different people offering different types of advice to that kid that's going up the stairs that has to get to this top. And this is like a Sears Tower kind of thing. And there's really good advice and there's a good bit of really bad advice. And the individual has to synthesize all of that.
It also speaks to like human instinct to want to be empathetic. And it's hard for people to know what to say in those moments. I'm so sorry, but you look great, you poor thing. Anything I can do. They're not platitudes. They're very authentic. But how would you know how to respond to these people? There really isn't anything they can do. Bring over a casserole? No, just them asking you is nice enough.
If I were to change anything that the common person asks somebody who's grieving is don't ask the question, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
Because it immediately goes to the individual having to work a whole lot. How am I today? How am I this week? How am I over the last 6 months since breakfast? So the more specific questions an individual can ask, such as, how are you today? Or what are you looking forward to next week? Or what's been the hardest part of this last week? The individual doesn't have to burn calories to answer that because you're already weighted with all this emotional tax. And I've talked to a lot of folks when they ask just, how are you? I was like, let's rephrase that. Let me give you a whole bunch of scenarios and you choose the one that's best for you. And I'll be happy to parse that one.
Yeah. This is kind of where small talk goes to die. And you really want to help. And it's so hard to educate people on knowing what to say in these moments because they're not doing it with any malevolent intent. They genuinely care. But you're right. Like, how do you change that conversation? How are you is just so How do you think I am? You don't want to respond hostily.
Yeah. And I don't want to come across jaded. Like sometimes I'm quite angry over the situation. On other days, I got the chance to spend 19 years of my life with and was really close to somebody that nobody ever had that opportunity to get to know her the way I know her, right? And I'm quite thankful for that. But it's always a whirlwind of emotions, and it never feels good when somebody asks how you're doing and you just give the answer fine, because it's a lie and the other person knows it's a lie, right? So we need to ask better questions of those bereaving so you can bifurcate that conversation and just don't make those individuals burn more calories than they already have to.
Kermit, what was your wife's name?
Linda.
It's a beautiful name.
My wife came to the U.S. when she was 15 from South Korea. She's going through immigration, and they asked her, what do you want your American name to be? And she's like, what? And they had to write it down because she couldn't understand it. And her name is Hyoseon, by the way, Hyoseon. And she asked her mom what was the name of Wonder Woman, like the real name of Wonder Woman. And she went Linda Carter. So she said Linda. That's how she got to be Linda, Dr. Linda Farber.
That's incredible. How did you meet?
We met walking our dogs in Birmingham. She was doing her fellowship in oncology at UAB, and I was working at a NASA, managing a NASA affiliate called Challenger Learning Center. And we both loved dogs, and her dog was rambunctious and mine wasn't. So we traded leashes, and she invited me to a Broadway show, and the rest was history.
It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. We look at, without sounding like a cat poster, like how do you convert your pain to purpose? And most people aren't born with like a fire in their belly to change things unless they've been affected by it, because no one expects these things to happen. Can you share with us what you're doing these days? Sure.
And for me, this is actually quite easy. And it's not a burden that I have. I'm going to continue my wife's legacy of being a prolific educator. She did one hell of a job, and she never had the tools that she needed to execute. And I'm going to build those tools, and it's going to make the other doctors after her, for I would like to think many, many years, to have a much easier experience in disseminating and communicating diseases and conditions of where they are in their journey, what they're going through, and what to expect next.
So you're the founder of a company called Paths, is that correct? Village Creed, I read as well.
It's two different things, and
okay.
We have a company called Paths, and the focus of Paths is called Care Paths. Care Paths is for the medical community, and it's helping doctors to pull together any combination of videos, documents, audio files, creatable forms, webinars like support groups, and more. So you can give them a series of steps in an order that makes sense to help the patient along the journey.
And how is it being received?
Quite well. The first doctor, she asked to be a part of the board of our company, and she really thinks we're going to move mountains with this thing. And we have 4 other healthcare entities that we're onboarding, and I love the feedback. We know the code can be better, but we don't have a shortage of talent to build the code to do the very things that we need to do. So I'd like to say we have 99 problems, but the code itself isn't one.
That's fantastic. There are so many holes in the dam to plug. What would you say are like the top 2 or 3 for you?
Helping doctors to adhere to the very reason and purpose that they went into medicine, which is the Hippocratic Oath. People go into medicine to learn the very best of what they can in all things medicine, and they want to take and convey that. The second tenet is to take and convey that and make the patient the very first priority. And I would argue that's gotten lost over the last 20-something years, and we can do better.
Do you have thoughts on the reasons for that loss? Is it more the institutionalization of health systems and the burden of meeting your numbers every week?
I think administrators but there's lots of things that are going to get in the way. Everything from drug companies to insurance to everything else. Don't feel like I'm smart enough to answer all of those things. I do think I can improve the relationship between doctors and patients. So I kind of have tunnel vision in that space. And I think if doctors are better equipping their patients, that they're going to be much happier with their outputs and when they get home from work every day.
Yeah, and again, I was reading some of your work, and I was diagnosed a billion years ago when there was nothing, and now there's too much. But too much is a good problem to have. The question then is, how do you get the right things into the brains and the practices of the doctors? Where are they getting their information from?
Yes.
Let's say they do have congenital Hippocrates inside them.
Right.
It's incredibly overwhelming.
It is. And not everybody knows to go to the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, right? Here's all the best practices and where they are and what the doctors need to be communicating and the standards they need to be treating by. There's so much misinformation out on the web now, and it's really hard to get that appointment with your doctor or the next appointment with your doctor, or you have to have the test before you get the appointment and you have to have insurance first. People who are hungry for information, they're going to go find that information themselves, and they're going to get on the internet. And my wife and many, many other doctors have to fight misinformation prior to even talking about the information that they want to share in the clinic setting. So if you have a 20-minute time frame, which is a lot because my wife would spend 40 minutes or so, but you have to debunk the myths that are out there, and then you have to guide them. And when you do guide them, you do it orally. And in today's age, I actually find it unacceptable. We get information from our medical teams in most cases just through talking to one another. And it's no different than how we got information when that guy sat on the side of the mountain and he the Sermon on the Mount stuff. Well, nothing has changed in 2,000 years in medicine when it comes to the doctor and patient engagement and how we disseminate and communicate information. And we have had far too much innovation in healthcare for us to have the same vehicle or lack thereof when it comes to here's how we're going to prepare the patient and here's how we're going to measure and track and guide their journey.
All right, one last question before we go. I've seen this trend where it's too easy to blame the doctors when they themselves are struggling to practice Hippocrates against the backdrop of all the cholesterol you just cited that gets in the way of what they really want and need to do for those patients. What would you say to people in terms of helping them appreciate having an empathy for those doctors who are under so much stress? And the narrative today is all about burnout, there's physician suicide. It's a terrible situation in many cases.
Yeah, terrible. And for some, it leads to overwhelming stress and it ends up taking their life. I would ask for them to put themselves in the doctor's shoes and say, what would you do? With a rising population that we have and fewer people going into medicine, and you having to see more and more patients because patients have to be seen, something has to give. And one of the things that's given is time. So what are we going to do? How can we expand the time with the doctor at home so you can go home with all these videos and material that the doctor has curated for you that they have in their repository, like a library? This is everything that I want you to know about this particular type of breast cancer. I can't tell you the times my wife has laid on my lap at home And she told me about a patient that she was wrapping up with. And she said, at the very end, I thought we were great. And she evaluates every patient in where they are and how they feel about something. And then she'll come to the end of a client setting, and they ask a question that she can't answer. And it's not that she doesn't have the ability to answer it. She goes, Kermit, it's a 45-minute answer. And I don't have 45 minutes for one more question. Let's build out ways of taking all of the content that's in the doctor's heads of what they know and put it into a format that they can go home with and say, great, here's a QR code on that thing and scan it right here. And then you're going to have this video, document, audio file, whatever that thing is. And you have documentation of who has watched that video and who hasn't, or where you dropped off. So the next time you go in for your appointment, the doctor knows what it is that you've consumed of their content. The curation isn't the hard part. Heck, just the National Comprehensive Cancer Network has so much material out there. It's putting those tools into a format that the patients can use. And I might be talking here too much, but the time for the patients to consume it isn't when they're overwhelmed in the clinic setting. Everybody needs to eat when they're hungry, and you need to be at a calmer place to go through this type of heavy material. You need your doctor's time, and then you need to be able to unpack that, and we can do better.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Advocacy means different things to different people, but for me, it sounds like we agree on the idea that it's to help make a situation less horrible for the next person that walks in your shoes.
Yes. And
Kermit,
I'll
you
sleep
may
because of that. Yeah.
Yes. You may say that there's no elevator to healing, but you're definitely not on the stairs. You are on an escalator, and you are rapidly proving that advocacy does matter, and you're doing an incredible service to your late wife. So I'd like to dedicate this episode to her, Dr. Linda Farmer. Rest in peace. Thank you for your service, and thank you for giving birth to this new opportunity to heal other people. Kermit Farmer, man, I don't even know how to outro you. There's so many things there. You're just a decent human, salt of the earth, genuine. I just want to be your friend.
We'll get a beer together.
We will get that as a date, my friend. Take care of yourself. God bless. And listeners, thank you for joining us. What a humbling, extraordinary show. Thank you very much. Out of Patience with Matthew Zachary is an Off-Script Health production. The executive producers are Matthew Zachary and Andrew McDowell. It's mixed and edited by Kyle Moore. If you like the show, ratings and reviews are always welcome. Leave us a message anytime at 855-AUDIO-66. That's 855-AUDIO-66 to share your healthcare shitness with us, and we might just play them on the air on a future episode. For more information about this show and Off-Script Health, visit offscript.com. That's offscript, no T.com.
Are you looking for a new job or want a career change? Look no further than Monster.com. Need a little help standing out? Our expert resume writing services will make sure you shine. Want to brush up on your interview skills? Engage with our AI interview prep tool. Want some advice on negotiating your new salary? Visit our salary tools and extensive library of career advice articles, and you'll have all the tips and tricks you'll need to succeed. Visit Monster.com today and take the first step towards your career. Monster.com. Find your right job fit.